Because airlines are in a fairly bullish mood after Easter, the first busy period in about 2 years in many markets, including our own, and one that has left many airlines and airports around the world struggling to handle the sudden surge in demand. We won't name them individually, but there's been lots of them. But even as restrictions are relaxed, the global industry will still lose $11 billion this year, taking the overall net losses for the aviation sector globally between 2020 and 2022 to $200 billion. So what does that mean for the Irish and international tourism sector? I am going to be joined now by the former and current CEOs of Lingus. So please give a warm welcome to IATA Director General Willie Walsh and Lingus's new CEO, Lynne Embleton. And a very, very special welcome to Lynne Embleton, because this is her first public foray since her appointment as the first female chief executive of the carrier. So you're very, very welcome, Lynne.
Thank you.
So Lynne, you read all of these books, about like the first 100 days and the whole lot. You took on the job at the height of the aviation, or height of the pandemic, with aviation was just virtually grounded everywhere. How you finding both the job and life in Ireland?
Well, I'm loving Ireland for sure,
yeah.
And whether that's the colleagues I'm working with, it's getting around all the restaurants, and actually it's getting around north, south, and west to find all these amazing places. And I have to say, it's a beautiful country. Yeah. I think I could be doing this job for years and not having explored all the lovely places to go to. Now, coming to the job, and just to be clear, I started the job on the 5th of April. I was asked to start the job on the 1st of April, and I thought, I'm not taking this job on April Fool's Day, so 5th of April it was. I came into this business, this industry here, when aviation was absolutely at a crisis point. And those early months, not only could I not go out and enjoy restaurants and everything else, but we had really, really difficult time for our people, really difficult time. Focus on cash, focus on dialogue with government about restrictions and the state of the sector. So I'm not saying it was particularly fun for the first phase, but we've turned a corner now. And one thing that I think the COVID demonstrated was just how important aviation is to society. We connect people. In the belly of the planes, we're moving food and cargo and medicines. But people need to see people. People need to get face to face. And we saw that once restrictions were lifted, people want to travel. And at Aer Lingus, we've got an amazing brand, such a long history in the airline, and all of our focus now is on getting our mojo back and getting back up and running, and we're getting all of our energy into that.
Willie, we are, obviously we might discuss maybe the impacts of that massive impact, especially in terms of staff retention and recruitment and retraining and upskilling. But it was interesting to see there was a UK parliamentary report earlier this week which spoke to what it described as the disproportionate and arbitrary restrictions and the impact of them. We spoke earlier with Professor Luke O'Neill about how well governments managed it, including our own. But when you look back now at the impact of those restrictions, what are your thoughts on them?
Well, I think it's terrible. When we went into this pandemic, we didn't know what we were dealing with, and I think you can accept that governments needed to take measures. But 2 years into it, the fact that we were still in many countries taking the same measures when we had tons of data available to us, still taking the same measures as we did when we were dealing with an unknown, is a scandal. Because the crisis that the airline industry faced was not one from a pandemic. It was one from the closure of countries by governments. It was border closures. We were quoting, I was quoting data from the UK because they produced a lot of data. But at a time when the UK was restricting its access, closing borders to some countries, the positivity rate in the UK was nearly 9%. it was actually more dangerous to be in the UK than it was to be flying into the UK. The positivity rate of all of the people that were flying at the time was 0.8%. And yet the government's view was if we stop people flying into the country, somehow we're going to make a difference. So I hope we just learn the lessons that the measures that were taken in many cases did very little, if anything, to address the actual pandemic. It didn't keep the virus out. Just look at China today. A zero COVID, everybody said, look at how good that is. And look at what they're having to do. Shanghai is in lockdown. It looks like Beijing will go into lockdown at the time when the rest of the world, including many other countries in Asia, are opening up. So, there's a lot to be learned. As I said, you can have sympathy for governments who felt that they needed to take some severe measures early on when they were dealing with an unknown. But perpetuating those measures for as long as they did, in the name of the health of the nation, to me was a scandal.
And obviously there were very controversial measures, Willie, such as mandatory health quarantine, but the digital COVID cert was a game changer. I know I can't ask Lynne this because she's in a closed period ahead of the Q1 results next Friday, but can I ask you, Willie, about just what I was chatting about earlier, and that is the scale of the losses globally, but also I'm sure closer to home as well, and how that is going to be dealt with, because in a lot of cases debt was warehoused, or in a lot of cases it was sort of given on a conditional basis. So what is going to happen though that extraordinary level of support runs out? Because possibly part of the reason why we're scrambling to get airports open and get everything back up is because there are very limited resources globally to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And maybe to put it into context, because people ask me, how does this compare to 2001 or to the global financial crisis? And maybe a simple way of looking at it is in 2001, at an industry level, revenue fell by 6.4% versus the previous year. In 2009, so after the collapse of Lehman's in 2008, revenues fell by 16.5%. So the global financial crisis was on a much bigger scale than what we witnessed post the tragic events of 9/11. In 2020, revenues fell by 60% versus 2019. So on a completely different scale to anything we'd seen before, which required measures to be taken that were much more severe than we had taken in the past. The good news is, as Lynne says, once the restrictions on borders for international travel are removed or relaxed, there's an immediate response from customers. And
just to bring Lynne in on that, because one of the big questions is, are we ready for the rebound, both in the sector generally, but the aviation tourism industry in particular, and what is that looking like? Like surely staffing, recruitment, skilling, getting people back up, because you can have all the capacity in the world, but it doesn't matter unless you're getting bums on seats and have the entire infrastructure or the ecosystem, as the Minister described it, to support that.
And I think one of the things that was tricky actually over this period was when were restrictions going to be lifted, and when could we get flying again? So I think of 2021 as the year of perpetual planning, where we thought things would change, and then we were disappointed for a while. As you know, we were losing a million a day for 2 years. So the impact has been stark. But what we did know is the way to rebuild the balance sheet is to get flying and get the business back. And we've actually been delighted at the recruitment, and we've been bringing people into the business. We're very closely, and have been since late end of last year, looking at what's our ambition, and then let's make sure we've got the aircraft, the people to do that. There are pressures in the supply chain, and I think airports all over
the world
are suffering. But I think we've shown that it's airlines an attractive industry to be in. We're getting people wanting to work with us. We're getting them trained up, and we've got an incredibly ambitious plan for this summer. And it's 90% of what we had going into the pandemic, 90% of our capacity, and going from almost nothing, standing still, to that scale of operation. This is where the job gets fun, because it's really quite exciting to get things moving again.
And Lynne, can I just ask you, because obviously we've heard how important obviously the international, particularly the North American market is to the tourism recovery offering here. How is that looking for you? I know when we were at this conference virtually last year, one of the concerns was there a risk that we would lose key slots? Would we lose out on that competitive aspect? But is that going to be an area of growth for Aer Lingus and for the economy generally? How confident are we about that?
Yeah, so the North Atlantic piece was a key part of growth before the pandemic for Aer Lingus, and that's absolutely where we're getting back to and where we intend to get back to. The location of Dublin as a hub for the transatlantic is perfect. The pre-clearance facilities makes it an attractive place to transit for customers across Europe. We've bought in aeroplanes, getting shiny new aircraft, which, by the way, much more sustainable in terms of their fuel consumption. But when we got shiny new aircraft in the middle of the pandemic, I did wonder what we were going to do with them. But we've taken delivery of new fuel-efficient new aeroplanes. We've got more to come. So I think we can get back into the growth trajectory that we had. And Dublin's really well placed for that.
Willie, a big question mark over, obviously there has been huge pent-up demand, but a lot of it is being driven by travel. We all just want to, get away again. We heard earlier about that sort of maybe perhaps some question marks over the business travel market. When you look across, obviously you've got a much more of a helicopter view of the sector. I mean, some airlines and some countries are doing much better than others, and where do you think that we fit within that, I suppose, that panoply?
Yeah, I think there's some real positives. Now, at IATA, we don't look at the purpose of travel, but we look at the cabin of travel. So if I look at people who are flying in premium cabins, business class or first class, that's actually recovering at a faster pace than economy travel, which has been a surprise. And it would appear that a lot of those people are traveling for leisure purposes. This is the premium leisure market, so they're upgrading their experience on board the aircraft. I think they're upgrading their experience in hotels and tourism as well. And I think that is a potential positive for us. Now, whether that will be sustained through the economic issues that are likely to come our way in the next few months or next couple of years is a big question. Different parts of the world, Asia is lagging. Asia last year at an international level was at 7% of where it was in 2019. It's up to 11% today. The US is pretty much back to where it was, which is for us in Ireland and for the tourism business here, I think that's a real positive.
Earlier this week, there was such a flurry of reports about the aviation sector, but earlier this week, Heathrow Airport sort of distinguished itself by striking not quite a bit of a bum note, but a discordant note by saying, we don't believe this is a blip. We believe there are going to be more long-term implications in terms of recovery for the sector. And, there was some maybe commentary to the effect, well, is this aligned to what its needs are and maybe wanting to increase prices? Or where do you fit on that blip versus longer-term challenges spectrum?
Well, Lynne can comment as well.
Heathrow, I'm coming to her.
They're bandits. They're just pure bandits, and all they're trying to do is prove to the regulator that they need to increase their prices. So they have to present the most dull outlook that you will ever see. It's complete nonsense. Heathrow will recover faster than the rest of the UK. It's a very strong market. It always has been, it always will be. So I would dismiss anything that Heathrow said.
For Lynne, for you, it struck me that had you stayed in the world of cargo, you would be literally flying it because they had such a good pandemic, if there is such it's a bit of an oxymoron to say that. But for you, looking at now right across the airline, do you think this is a blip? Do you think this pent-up demand will continue? And where do you see business travel?
Yeah, no, I don't see it as a blip at all. And Willie's absolutely right. This is his favourite subject, so I'm glad you asked him about because I always like watching him get really animated every time we mention Heathrow. But it's, what's really interesting, if you asked Heathrow this question at a different time in the regulatory cycle, when charges weren't being set, I think you might get a very different answer. Leisure demand, premium leisure demand is looking really good. I think what's great to see today is getting people in a room face to face. Business needs to come back. I think people have got used to not going into the office. And I think businesses have suffered because of that. If you're somebody new now coming into a job,
particularly younger generations,
you haven't got
early
colleagues
20s.
to learn from, to pick up from, and yeah. So I think we have to get business interaction going again. I think it's been a little bit slow generally, but this tourism and aviation was an industry where the forecasts over 10, 20 years were all up. So we might take a slight dip down, but we're going to get back. We're going to get back on a growth trajectory, and it might lag a bit, but we've seen that once restrictions are lifted, people travel again.
Well, and I know this is your first media public outing, and I know I can't ask you about the results, but I can ask you about this because you're amongst friends. What was it like working for him?
I like the guy. I know that's quite weird, but I think he's great. When I was considering to do the Aer Lingus job, I thought I know somebody who knows, and you know Willie. He's a smart guy. He knows the industry really, really well. He's not one to shirk a challenge, so I thought I'll get some advice. And he says, Lynne, you're going to love it. And there was a few moments last year where I thought, I'm not asking him for advice again. But looking back now, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about resilience. I was chatting to Willie before the conference, and he says, Lynne is well fit for this. She's well fit for this. I says, I hear you. He goes, no, she's well fit for this. She got a black belt in Taekwondo during the pandemic. Which is absolutely amazing. And it brings me on to a theme that I want to ask both of you about, because it is another one of those buzzwords like sustainability, like competitiveness, and it is really resilience, both on a professional, personal, corporate level. It's a word that's bandied about, kind of well-being, but how important is that for, particularly when we hear about so many businesses that are coming back and are actually suffering because of demand as opposed to lack of it? Willie?
Resilience is absolutely key, you know, and I think one of the great things about our industry is just how resilient it is and how resilient the people are and how great the people are. It's, you know, same with the tourism industry. Everybody will have experienced it here. We've gone through terrible times, and yet we're here almost celebrating, which, you know, is the message we need to send out. You know, we have good things to look forward to. We've survived. We have a job to do, and like the job you talked about, the debt mountain. You know, everybody in this room has had to, you know, face serious financial issues over the past 2 years, but we will get through it. 85 airlines failed in the past 2 years. I think what has surprised people is that it wasn't 285 airlines that failed, and most of those, if not all of those who failed, were actually probably on the road to failure before the crisis. They were, you know, weak financially. Didn't really have a brand or a network that made them stand out. So I think it demonstrates just how resilient it is. But, you know, you want to enjoy an industry, the airline industry, the tourism industry, it's a great industry. But if you want an easy life, you know, this is not the place to go. Because there's always challenges, yeah. And there'll be more. There will be more. But we'll have learned good things from this one that we'll be able to apply to the next one, and the same as we learned from previous ones.
Then I think it was your kids who actually got you into Taekwondo, and well done on getting that accomplishment. But just what Willie was speaking about, just that for leaders, whether it's a major corporate or small business, that whole resilience, well-being and kind of innovating, they seem to be some of the main themes that have come out of this period that we hopefully are coming out of successfully.
I come back to just how tough it has been for people at certain points in this pandemic, and the well-being topic, you know, it's been talked about for decades, but I think it was never more important than over the last couple of years. And at a personal level, yeah, I can feel tense, and I've got all sorts of things in my head, and I'm worrying about all sorts of things. I put the doorbell on, and I get into the training with my colleagues. I finish an hour, and I can't remember what the hell I was worried about before I went in. And it's such an amazing stress relief, and forces you to switch off. Otherwise, you get hit. So, and I think everybody making some time to find a way of stepping back is really, really important. And I'm not sure I would have had the same experience over the last couple of years if I hadn't had an outlet like that.
Look what you created, Willie Walsh. I want to ask you both about, before we run out of time, and that is the key issue of sustainability, because Willie, the aviation sector has certainly in the past got a bad name. It's trying to change that. How important will that be for the aviation industry to position itself as part of the solution and not the problem?
Yeah, absolutely critical. It is an existential issue. You've heard other speakers mention that. The problem for the aviation industry, for airlines, is that to decarbonise our business, it's going to be difficult. So, you know, we're looking at a path to net zero in 2050, which the industry has committed to. So, you know, like other industries, we've actually made the commitment and we believe we have a credible path to get there. The principal way will be through the adoption of the use of sustainable aviation fuels. They are real. They've been in use for over 15 years now. The problem has been availability and price. The price of a tonne of sustainable aviation fuel today is about 2.5 to 2.7 times the price of a tonne of kerosene. Despite that, the airline industry used every single drop of sustainable aviation fuel that was available last year. 100 million litres, and the industry would have used more if more was available. Already, and through this crisis, airlines have committed to buying 14 billion litres. So at a time when they face the biggest financial crisis in their history, they're still making commitments because they recognise that this path to net zero is a must. And I've been really pleased to see how through the crisis that there's been an ongoing commitment, airlines putting their money where their mouth is, and I've absolutely no doubt that the industry will be able to achieve net zero in 2050. And
do you think, Lynne, that we will be able to reconcile that sort of inescapable human desire to see each other, to meet each other, to travel, whether it's for work or business? Because obviously the COVID crisis hasn't deterred us from wanting to travel, but people, I know personally, I'm very much more conscious now of that. So how do you think that we will be able to do that to have sustainable growth where we can, whether as consumers or people working in the industry, that we can travel and travel conscientiously and sustainably?
Yeah, and you've had people already today talking about a long history and taking a point in time and talking about innovation. And I think if we sat here in a few years from now, it'll be an aviation industry that is still absolutely fundamental, I think, to society. It's a real force for good, but it will be a one that's made huge progress on sustainability. At IAG, we came with a commitment ahead of any of the other European carriers to say 10% sustainable aviation fuel by 2030, completely committed to the IATA 2050 goals. And then coming back to whenever there's a new need, it's a business opportunity, and the industry around sustainable aviation fuel is going to be huge. And I would just encourage Ireland to get on the back of it.
Yeah. And just to comment on this, because facts are important. A lot of people talk about, you know, the solution will be stop short-haul flying. You know, and I can see how some
France, get the train. Yeah.
Some politicians will promote this. So if you replaced every single flight in Europe of less than 500 kilometres, so that's about the distance between Dublin and London, which, you know, if you had an alternative, good luck. But if you replaced every single flight in Europe of under 500 kilometres, you would reduce the CO2 from the industry by 3.8%. It's not going to be the solution. You know, you can sort out much better ways of going forward. So being able to fly and being able to do it in a sustainable way, there's no contradiction there because the industry will achieve it. And we need to be aware of the, you know, the efforts that are, I think, misleading people in the name of sounding good by doing things like this. So the French clearly have a good reason to try and stop flights short haul. It's mainly protectionism. But the rest of Europe doesn't have the luxury that France has in terms of a high-speed rail network. And you know, we here don't have the luxury of being able to get off the island other than...
and sometimes booking a train can be more costly than a flight.
It's cheaper flying. But you should not feel ashamed of taking a flight. You should not. So long as you can convince yourself that the purpose for your flight is reasonable, and so long as you can be convinced, and I hope you will be convinced, that the industry is determined to address this issue, then there isn't a contradiction between flying and addressing the environmental challenge.
When you left IAG, you told me you were going to spend more time in the Shannon. I thought we'd never hear from you again, but here we are. Willie Walsh, it is great to see you back, and as effervescent as ever. And to Lynne, we wish you well in your new role. Thank you to both the former and current CEOs of our Lingus, Lynne Embleton and Willie Walsh. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.